Imagine losing everything you love, your family, your wealth, your health, and yet still managing to keep your faith. This is not just an ancient biblical story. It is a deeply emotional journey that challenges even the strongest beliefs. Today, we will learn the story of Job, a man who faced the unimaginable and yet remained steadfast in his trust in God. Stay with us, because what you are about to discover may transform the way you see life and suffering. Before we begin, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps us bring messages like this to more people seeking inspiration and understanding. Now let's dive into Job's story. Job was a man of integrity and righteousness, known for his impeccable morals and devotion to God. He lived in the land of Uz and was described as one of the richest and most respected men in the East. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, in addition to vast properties, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 pairs of oxen, and 500 donkeys. Moreover, he had many servants and was considered the greatest man among all the people of his region. Despite his wealth, Job did not allow it to define who he was. He was a God-fearing man, careful to shun evil. After periods of celebrations and feasts held by his children, Job would always conduct purification rituals, offering sacrifices to God for each of them, thinking, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This was his constant practice, a demonstration of his faith and his desire to keep his family spiritually aligned. However, what happens next takes us to a heavenly scene that few could imagine. God, in his sovereignty, summons the angels to his presence, and among them is Satan. The Lord points out Job as an example of integrity and faithfulness, saying, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him, blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." But Satan, ever cynical, responds, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? Take away these blessings and he will surely curse you to your face." And so God allows Satan to test Job, but with one condition: he must not lay a hand on Job himself. This heavenly dialogue, recorded in Job 1:6-12, marks the beginning of a series of devastating events in Job's life. In a single day, Job receives 4 messages that completely change his life. One messenger arrives to inform him that his oxen and donkeys were stolen by the Sabeans, and the servants attending them were killed. Before he could process this tragedy, another messenger comes, saying that the fire of God fell from the sky, burning up his sheep and more servants. Immediately after, a third messenger brings the news that the Chaldeans had raided his camels and killed even more servants. But the most devastating news came last. A strong wind caused the house where his children were feasting to collapse, killing all of them. The impact of these losses would be enough to break anyone. Job, however, responds in a way that surprises even the most attentive reader. He tears his robes, an act of mourning, shaves his head, and falls to the ground in worship, saying, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." Even in his grief, Job did not sin or blame God for what happened. But the story does not end there. Satan, frustrated by Job's resilience, returns to God, claiming that Job only remained faithful because his health was untouched. Then, with God's permission, Job is afflicted with painful sores from head to toe. His physical pain is so intense that he sits among ashes and scrapes himself with broken pottery. Even in this state, Job maintains his integrity, even when his own wife provokes him, saying, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." But Job responds calmly, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" In all this anguish, Job did not sin with his lips. At this point, the story challenges us to reflect. How would we react in the face of such trials? Job shows us that true faith is not based on favorable circumstances, but on an unshakable trust in God's character. As Job struggled to process his losses and endure his pain, 3 friends came to visit him: Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. They had heard about Job's tragedy and came to console him. When they arrived, they were so struck by his condition that they sat in silence beside him for 7 days and 7 nights. This initial gesture of solidarity showed respect and empathy for his suffering. However, after this period of silence, the dialogues between Job and his friends began. The first to speak was Eliphaz, who implied that Job must have committed some sin to deserve such suffering. According to Eliphaz, God is just and would not punish an innocent person. He suggested that Job should accept his situation as divine discipline and seek God's forgiveness. Bildad and Zophar followed this reasoning, reinforcing the idea that Job needed to admit some hidden wrongdoing. Bildad was even more severe, insinuating that Job's children had brought death upon themselves. Zophar, in turn, accused Job of arrogance for not acknowledging his guilt, asserting that he was receiving far less punishment than he deserved. These words, rather than comforting Job, only deepened his suffering. He became indignant because he knew he had not committed any sin that justified such calamities. In his pain and frustration, Job lamented the day he was born. He wished he had never existed, expressing that his life was full of agony and that he saw no purpose in continuing to live. Job responded to his friends with sharp words, calling them worthless physicians and accusing them of masking their lack of compassion with moralistic speeches. In Job 13:4-5, he said, "You, however, smear me with lies. You are worthless physicians, all of you. If only you would be altogether silent. For you, that would be wisdom." While Job's friends persisted in their accusations, Job cried out for a direct encounter with God. He wanted to present his case before the Almighty, seeking an explanation for his suffering. Job recognized God's sovereignty, but he couldn't understand why he was being treated as an enemy. Job's anguish went beyond physical and emotional pain. He began to question divine justice. Why do the wicked prosper while the righteous suffer? Why did God seem distant and inaccessible? These questions reveal the depth of Job's suffering, which was not just about what he had lost, but about his struggle to reconcile his experience with his faith in God. Despite his pain and doubts, Job demonstrated remarkable hope. In Job 19:25, he declared, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth." These words reflect Job's confidence that somehow God would intervene in his situation, and that, in the end, justice would prevail. As the dialogue continued, it became clear that Job would not find comfort in his friends. Their responses, though often poetic and well-articulated, were filled with accusations and judgments that only intensified Job's suffering. He felt isolated, misunderstood, and in a constant battle to maintain his faith amid the chaos. At this moment, Job's narrative teaches us something profound about human suffering. There are no easy answers. Job did not understand why he was suffering, and his friends, instead of helping, worsened the situation by trying to explain the unexplainable. Yet, even in the darkness, Job continued seeking God, showing that true faith persists even when all evidence seems to contradict it. As the dialogues between Job and his friends deepened, Job's suffering became even more unbearable. It was no longer just physical pain, but spiritual isolation and a sense of injustice that weighed on him. Job cried out for answers, but the heavens seemed silent. Even so, he did not abandon his faith in God. On the contrary, he longed even more for a direct encounter with the Creator to understand the reason behind his suffering. Meanwhile, his friends persisted with their arguments. They firmly believed that Job's suffering was a result of some hidden sin. But since Job knew he was innocent, his words began to reflect not only frustration but also a profound thirst for justice. In Job 23:3-4, he declared, "If only I knew where to find him, if only I could go to his dwelling, I would state my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments." This pursuit of an encounter with God demonstrates Job's persistent faith. He did not understand the reason for his pain, but believed that God held the answers. Amid his agony, Job began to express a vision of hope that went beyond earthly suffering. He believed that even if he died, there would be ultimate redemption. In Job 19:25-26, he proclaimed, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God." These words from Job reveal a perspective that transcends his immediate pain. He acknowledged that there was something greater at play, even if he could not fully comprehend it. This vision of a Redeemer who would intercede for him is one of the most significant passages in the book, pointing to the idea of eternal hope even amid suffering. All the while, God remained silent, But something was about to change. After all the arguments from his friends and Job's impassioned outcries, God finally broke his silence. He spoke to Job out of a storm, a manifestation symbolizing his power and authority. Yet instead of directly answering Job's questions, God began asking questions of his own. God presented Job with a series of rhetorical questions highlighting his greatness as the creator and sustainer of the universe. He asked Job if he had placed the stars in the sky, controlled the seas, or commanded the dawn to rise. In Job 38:4-5, God said, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know." These questions were not meant to humiliate Job, but to remind him that God is sovereign and his wisdom far surpasses human understanding. God did not explain the reason for Job's suffering or mention the heavenly dialogue with Satan. Instead, he redirected Job's focus to the grandeur and mystery of his creation, demonstrating that there is a greater purpose in everything he does. Upon hearing God's words, Job realized the limitation of his understanding and the vastness of divine wisdom. He responded with humility, saying, "I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth." Job 40:4. Job recognized that, though he might not fully understand the purpose of his suffering, he could trust in a just and sovereign God. Following this encounter, something extraordinary happened. God restored Job, giving him twice as much as he had before. He received new lands, livestock, and had another 7 sons and 3 daughters. The Bible describes his daughters as the most beautiful women in all the land, and Job gave them an inheritance, a rare act at the time that demonstrated his generosity and love. In addition, God rebuked Job's friends, declaring that they had not spoken the truth about him, and instructing them to offer sacrifices and ask Job to pray for their forgiveness. This reconciliation highlighted that, even amid his suffering, Job remained faithful and was vindicated for his integrity. After the dialogue with God and his subsequent restoration, Job's story leads us to profound reflections on the nature of suffering, faith, and divine sovereignty. Job's life, marked by loss, pain, and questions, culminates in a powerful demonstration that even amid chaos, God is in control and has a greater purpose for everything. Job was not only blessed again with wealth, health, and a family, but his reputation and integrity were also reaffirmed. God instructed his 3 friends who had wrongly judged Job to bring sacrifices and ask Job to pray for them. This final act of reconciliation emphasized that while Job's friends were correct about God's justice, they were wrong to accuse Job without reason. Job's restoration was more than just a reward for his patience. It was a testament to how God values faith, even when circumstances are incomprehensible. Job did not receive detailed explanations for his suffering. God never revealed to him the heavenly conversation with Satan that set everything in motion. This teaches us an important lesson. We may not always have all the answers about our suffering, but we can trust God, who sees the complete picture. Job's new life was filled with abundance and joy. He received twice as much as he had before his trials: 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 pairs of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. He also had 7 more sons and 3 daughters. The Bible describes these daughters as extraordinarily beautiful, and Job gave them an inheritance, something rare in that time, demonstrating his generosity and love for his family. Job lived another 140 years after his trials, long enough to see 4 generations of his descendants. He died old and full of years, a sign of blessing and fulfillment. Job's journey teaches us that while suffering is real and often inexplicable, it does not define our final story. God is faithful, and in his sovereignty, he works all things for the good of those who love him. However, the book of Job is not just a story of restoration. It invites us to reflect on deeper questions. How should we respond to suffering? How can we trust God when everything seems to go wrong? And what does it mean to have faith even when we cannot understand God's plans? Job's story also reminds us that suffering is not necessarily a sign of divine punishment. Job was a righteous man, and his trials were not caused by his sins, but by a spiritual battle he was unaware of. This teaches us that true faith is not based on favorable circumstances, but on trusting God's character and sovereignty, even in the midst of storms. Finally, Job's testimony points to something greater: the need for a redeemer. Job expressed hope in a Redeemer who would intercede for him, and this figure is fulfilled in Jesus Christ. For Christians, Jesus is the living Redeemer who knows our suffering, intercedes for us before God, and promises eternal restoration. Just as Job found peace and restoration, we too can find hope in Christ, even in the most challenging circumstances. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through Job's story. This narrative challenges us to examine our faith, our reactions to suffering, and our trust in God. If this content touched your heart, please leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this study with someone who needs inspiration or comfort. And before you go, I invite you to watch the next video appearing on your screen right now. In it, we explore another powerful story that can also change how you see life and faith. Thank you for being here, and may God bless you and your family. See you next time.